At any rate, 1925, July 1925, John Scopes, Dayton, Tennessee, agreed to be a guinea pig for the state's law that prohibited the teaching of any theory of origins that contradicted the account in Genesis. Converging on Dayton, two well-known personalities. On the top there you see William Jennings Bryan, three-time presidential candidate and fundamentalist. And down below you see for the defense, America's best-known attorney, Clarence Darrow, and a well-known agnostic. Dayton was suddenly the front page news worldwide, and a media circus ensues. And so what I put here are some of the funnier things I found on the internet about the trial. You see the monkey down below. I love that picture of the monkey. And then evolution, Scopes trial, see no evil, hear no evil. And then down below, the Anti-Evolution League. This sign at the top right, Darwin is right inside, is on a haberdasher's store. So, he makes hats. And then in the middle there, you see You Can't Make a Monkey Out of Me. Just go onto YouTube and you can hear the actual music. It's a funny little song. So despite the fun, there's a sense that momentous issues were at stake in Dayton. Does human descent from non-human ancestors undermine moral and religious values? And here you see a cartoon from those who were worried about this, the descent of the modernist down into atheism. You start denying one thing and then another and then another, and then finally you end up in atheism, the most terrible philosophy that you can imagine. And notice who's the last step. It's Sigmund Freud. They've got Sigmund Freud there. Well, the residents of Pittsburg, Kansas, closely followed the events of Dayton. Here's a picture of William Brandenburg. He was our president for many, many years. In many ways, a very admirable man. He's the person who rallied the troops the year after he came, and after the burning of Russ Hall, and rallied the troops and got the community organized so that we could have another Russ Hall. So he, in many ways, quite a man. He was a close friend of Harry Rimmer, and I'm going to show you some pictures of books of Harry Rimmer. This is the theory of evolution and the facts of science. I counted 95 entries in Rimmer's bibliography. He was prolific, and he went around the country arguing against evolution with anyone who would take him on. He was clever, he was incredibly funny, he was energetic, he knew a lot of facts of science, there's no question he knew that. But as if you read the biography of that his wife wrote about him, you'd think that he never lost a debate. His son, however, says about him, he says, he always lost the debate, but he always won the audience. If you can, that really brings up an interesting thing. Anyway, Brandenburg heard Rimmer down in Arkansas and invited him up here. So in 1924, Rimmer spoke at the KSTC at Brandenburg's invitation. There you see an article from the Collegio talking about the two talks that he gave here. Rimmer set up an archaeology museum on the third floor of the newly constructed Porter Hall in 1927. And there's an article again from the Collegio explaining how he's going to set up this archaeology museum. And there on the right, you see a skull that, I won't tell you the whole story unless we have extra time. Now that skull sits in Barbara Bonnekessen's office, and with that little thing in the skull that says it's from Dr. Harry Rimmer. So that's one of the things from his museum. Some of you might have heard of Gene de Grusen. Gene was old enough that he remembers seeing that museum, and he said he thought it was quite professionally done. Quite a compliment from Gene, who was either agnostic or atheist and had no use for anti-evolutionary thinking. Anyway, here's Porter Hall then and now, at least Porter Hall back in the 30s, and then Porter Hall now. And I want you to note, this is one of my favorite pictures on the right. I took it. If you notice on Porter Hall, there are four things on the four corners, and it mentions law and history and science. And up there, you can't see it well in this picture, it says philosophy. It's one of the first things I saw when I came to this campus, and I thought, this is the place for me. John Scott. Unhappily, I don't have a picture of John Scott. Assistant professor of history. He taught here for 2 years, came in 1923, Popular, innovative, encouraged play acting in his classes. I learned all this by reading collegiate articles about him. When the Scopes trial was in the news and before it had taken place, his students got the idea that they would hold a mock monkey trial downtown in the courthouse, not in his classroom, but in the courthouse downtown. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to dress up as Clarence Darrow and as William Jennings Bryan, the two people in the Scopes trial, and the judge, Ralston. They wanted to dress up like him, and they wanted to hold this mock monkey trial. So it was very much in keeping with Scott's style of teaching. He had taught them to play act. In one thing I read, he divided up the class into various interest groups and had them have a constitutional convention. Or another case where he had them divide up into the three branches of government and debate things. And so he was a very innovative kind of teacher. And the trial was announced in the three papers. Here I've got two of them, the Pittsburg Sun and the Pittsburg Headlight, and then also it was in the Collegio as well. So you can see here July 9th. The trial in Dayton was opening on the 10th, so this was announced before the trial. Now I mentioned that the businesses in Dayton had gotten involved. So you had the haberdasher with Darwin is right inside, and different businesses were out there promoting this thing for Dayton. Well, it seems that the businesses in Pittsburgh got involved as well. And this is a delightful piece that Jeanette Mock helped me find. This is from the Collegio, July 10th, so the day after the mock trial is announced in the papers. Live facts on local evolution. Here they're playing on the ambiguity in the word evolution, which may mean, evolution by natural selection, but also kind of progress. So local facts about, progress in business, I guess. But you have one monkey, chimpanzee maybe throwing a coconut or something at the other. Delightful ad. That's one of my prizes in this whole thing. The whole slideshow is worth that one right there. Brandenburg, when he heard about this, said no monkey business. And here I've got an article from the Pittsburg Sun which says that this trial will be shut down, the mock trial will be shut down. And there's a picture of Brandenburg and his dog. I don't have any story about that picture. I just found that in Randy Roberts' History of Pittsburg State University. It's a delightful picture. So, no monkey business. Scott was relieved of the class. Dean Trout of Trout Hall took his place. There's a picture of Trout in 1933, many years later. The students expressed support for Scott and dissatisfaction with Brandenburg's decision. Now, in order to learn that, you can't go to the Pittsburgh papers. You have to go to the Kansas City papers. Pittsburgh papers tended to downplay the controversy and say it wasn't important, and they were largely supportive of Brandenburg. The Kansas City papers went after Brandenburg and after Trout and supported Scott. So there's an interesting thing going on between Kansas City and Pittsburgh as well. So there you see an article, Students Rally for Evolution. A guy named Cedric Worth wrote this. And in that article, he says that the students hotly defended Scott and his teaching. One of the things that comes out in this is that it's not just evolution that he's teaching. He's teaching them about something called free love. And that gets him in trouble too, I think. That's sort of a side issue for my interest here, but free love is also part of this story. The students say that he didn't teach it except as his own opinion, and Scott says in this article and elsewhere that really he just wanted students to be able to, he wanted them to be able to think for themselves. He thought that he didn't want to make ideas safe for students, but students safe for ideas, or something like that. All right, so there's Trout. And then Brandenburg comes out denying that Scott's dismissal was connected in any way to the question of evolution. And there again an article from July 24. Okay, so Scott has the last word in the form of the Haldeman Julius Monthly, and some of you may know about this. Haldeman Julius, his Emanuel and Anna Marcette Haldeman Julius were in Girard, Kansas, and they were publishing something, at this time they're publishing something called the Haldeman Julius Monthly. Socialist-leaning, free-thinking magazine or journal. And in the second issue of that journal, They published side by side. They published Scott's article, which you see a picture of here, Fundamentalism in the Kansas State Teachers College. I'll talk about that. And side by side with that was Anna Marcette Holloman Julius's account of her and her husband going to Dayton, Tennessee to see the Scopes trial. Because as it turns out, let me show you the next slide. As it turns out, Clarence Darrow's publisher was Holloman Julius. And so here you see a picture on the left of Emmanuel and Anna Marcette next to Clarence and Ruby Darrow. Right after the trial, Clarence Darrow went to Greeley, Colorado to visit some family, and then he came back here in August to visit the Holloman Juliuses to discuss the future of his publications. And that picture there is taken in Girard, but then Darrow came over to Pittsburgh and spoke at the Stillwell and met reporters there and responded to questions from the trial judge in Dayton. His name was Ralston. So, let's back to this one. So Scott gets the last word, even though he's fired, basically. What he did, he writes an article almost in the style of Voltaire, in which he ridicules, with sarcasm and satire, Kansas State Teachers College. What he's arguing is that if you want to set up a fundamentalist school, look to Pittsburg, Kansas, because we have the best fundamentalist school ever. He argues that the President, Brandenburg, had hired mostly ministers from Methodist and Baptist churches, and that these were the greatest supporters of the Ku Klux Klan, what he calls the K-N-O-B-L-E, the Noble Klan. And he actually touches on his own story in this article, speaks of himself in the third person, but it's very, very clear he's talking about himself. And he makes it very clear in this article that the monkeying with the monkey business was part of the reason that he was dismissed. He also spoke out against the Klan in his classes, and that was something that apparently was something that was controversial, at least in those days. So, and another thing of interest to those of you who know that we're unionized faculty, Scott was very much interested in unionizing the faculty. He did not, of course, succeed in doing that. But, of course, later on, that would happen. So, and then I put that picture of the monkey just because I liked it. I found it in a Kansas City newspaper. I thought that's it's a fundamentalist monkey, actually, is what it says. Okay, let's see. Now, William Jennings Bryan died shortly after the trial. So this is the front page of the Pittsburgh Daily Headlight. It shows you how important Bryan was. It's sort of like the death of Scalia. I mean, it's in all the newspapers. And so it's July 29th, and there you see him with a book. Let's see, what does that say?
Mystery of the Origin.
Yeah, Mysteries of the Origin of Life, and then at the highest court of all. So he'll go find out about the truth, I guess. As you all know, maybe, the Scopes trial was fictionalized in the play Inherit the Wind. I just got through showing this to one of my classes. There's Darrow and Bryan on the left, and then Spencer Tracy and Frederick Marsh in the movie Inherit the Wind. In fact, that play has been set to film really 4 or 5 times. I've got, I think, 4 versions at home. So lots of people have done this, with lots of famous actors, as it turns out. In case you want a list, I can give it to you. Now, evolution is the standard subject at Pittsburg State University. Go over in the biology department and you will learn about it. You will learn about it in my department, in history, philosophy, and social sciences. We have on our staff and the chair of our department a cultural anthropologist. So evolution is very much taught on this campus these days. There's my friend Michelle Baquet, did a nice picture there of Charles Darwin. And then on the other side, of course, Gus and Gussie. That's from the 1960s. I want to thank Gene DeGruson, even though he's no longer with us. He's on the left there. This is the old Mosley Books downtown 6th Street. He was the one who first alerted me to the story of John Scott and turned me on to some of the original sources that I found. And then next to him is Dudley Cornish, formerly of History Department and author of the Civics.